Should we crash onwards to American Psycho then?
Yes, let's. In 2000, Lionsgate Films released this, American Psycho, Mary Harron's most accomplished film. I think her undisputed masterpiece. A film so gory most people probably don't listen to the satire, but they should, because it's not just about the excesses of the 80s and the worshipping of material goods. It's also a statement about the bankruptcy of our culture itself. Hey, Scott, try getting... Yeah. Anyway, hi.
Can I just say, I see what you did there, and I'm here for it.
Thank you. I knew I have at least one person appreciated that, so that's worth it. What a disaster we narrowly avoided. Mary Harron's blackly comic horror satire of toxic masculinity could have starred Leonardo DiCaprio and been directed by Oliver Stone, with Stone desiring to excise all of the satire from Harron's script. Yikes. Fortunately, Canadian director Harron finally persuaded Lionsgate to let her make American Psycho, with her original choice of leading man, Christian Bale, as Patrick Bateman. Harron, due to being a woman, and not simply due to not being Oliver Stone, brings a take on Bret Easton Ellis's vapid, narcissistic protagonist considerably less enamoured of him than many male directors might be. Very possibly because, working in the film industry, she's dealt with more than a few Batemans in her time. Bateman, that titular psycho, tells us in voiceover that there is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, but that, in any real sense, he doesn't exist. And, well, he's right. He's not an individual. He's an identikit, interchangeable Wall Street douchebag, regularly confused with any of 100 other indistinguishable, Italian couture-wearing, business card fetishising, image-obsessed, narcissistic waste of space. He derives all of his self-worth from the opinions of others, notably his mergers and acquisitions peers who, when they aren't measuring their little paper dick metaphors, are trying to one-up each other with who can obtain the most desirable dinner reservations. What does seem to set him apart is his penchant for casual, and sometimes more formally attired, murder. Describing it as the only thing that makes him feel, having taken the idea of the cutthroat business world a little too literally. After offing one of his peers, Jared Leto's Paul Allen, Bateman is visited by Willem Dafoe's private detective, who's investigating the disappearance of Allen, and thus begins a downward spiral in which Bateman's bloodlust becomes ever more extreme and his carefully manicured appearance begins to crack. American Psycho, while it has considerably more substance than its main character, isn't the deepest of films, but it remains, 20 years later, hugely entertaining, and Christian Bale's performance compelling and committed, managing to convince both in psychopathy and peevishness. And, amusingly, is based on an interview Bale saw of Tom Cruise in Letterman, in which Cruise transmitted intense friendliness with nothing behind the eyes. Its satire may not be the most biting or intellectual, but it's still, 20 years after release, timely. And the film is also regularly very funny. And we at Fuds and Film in particular will always be grateful to it for bringing us our pub quiz team name, Paul Allen's business card, and our potential band name, Cat Adapter. Now, while Scott has his say, I'm just going to try getting a reservation at Dorsia.
Yes, this has been one of my favourite films for 20 years, and I see no reason to change that fact at this point. Heartily enjoyed revisiting this, even though it's another one of these films that I don't really need to watch again, because it's pretty much permanently tattooed in my brain. Just so many things to like in here. It's a wonderfully committed performance. Christian Bale's obviously a tremendous actor. I'm not sure I've liked him more in any role than this. It's a terrific role. I cannot imagine trying to strip the satire from this. I don't know if Oliver Stone's thinking was people don't seem to understand what satire is and don't get it anyway, so just take it out and save them the bother.
Does that mean Oliver Stone doesn't understand what satire is, Scott? Is that what you're saying?
Oliver Stone doesn't understand a lot of things, witness JFK. But look, he's... At some point, I watched American Psycho 2, which they made, and it has William Shatner in it, and is exactly as good as you would expect from those two facts, where it was basically claiming that everything that, what Bateman does actually happened, rather than as a deviation of his
missed the entire point, is what American Psycho 2 did.
Missed the entire point, and it's an absolutely abysmal film. Absolutely dreadful. And it's exactly what I expect a film that didn't have any satire in it to be made if you took the American Psycho out of it. I mean, what's interesting about it is that Ellis's work is full of narcissistic sociopaths, and they're not supposed to be likable characters in it. And we've seen a few adaptations like Less Than Zero where they've tried to make some kind of they've tinkered with it to try and make the characters in some way relatable or people you can get behind, but that's inherently not the point of his work. You're not supposed to be identifying as Patrick Bateman as being a good guy who you would like to go out with. He's bad, obviously, because that's the point of it. And I think American Psycho it's a more playful adaptation of it, I think, and that works very well. It is often very funny, despite the kind of content matter of it, but it's always clear that this not really the point of the work is not the violence. It's the point of it is the juxtaposition between that and the society that they find themselves in, which is where everything is so commoditized and irreplaceable, and where everything's an object, and the whole capitalist milieu of this god-awful 80s neoliberal hellscape that we still find ourselves in, which somehow hasn't imploded yet, although it's not that far off it, surely. Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of rambling now, but I just like the film an awful lot. I think it's really great, and if you don't strip it from any kind of political context if you want to, strip it from any kind of social context if you want to, and it will still be a really funny, deeply engaging, and really well-made film that's heartily worth watching. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I wonder about people talking about stripping something from a political or social context. It kind of stops it being a film. Everything's political in some way or other. So everything is made in the world where all of that stuff exists. But
I think thankfully this one's a bit easier to kind of take without like. All the people that watched Fight Club and took entirely the wrong ideas from it, which is another interesting film about masculinity and how we could talk for all day. Fucked everything up. But yeah, it would be very difficult, I think, to watch American Psycho and take the wrong message from it, which I think is something to be proud of. Terrific achievement. I love it.
Yeah, I think people misunderstand Bret Easton Ellis's work a lot, I think, as you said, and like people like Patrick Bateman are not supposed to be likable. They're supposed to be ridiculous. The caricatures, really. Yeah. They're over the top. The violence is exaggerated. His desires are exaggerated because it's a satire very often, in very many cases. And I think this film does a pretty good job of getting a lot of the sense of the book. I mean, it's different in a lot of ways. The book's a bit more ambiguous about whether anything happened, whereas the film, it quite clearly didn't. Yeah. And that the fact that American Psycho 2 exists it's so weird because it didn't happen. None of it happened. The whole point of the film is that none of it happens. I mean, there's one minor bit of ambiguity at the end in that because they're also interchangeable, maybe the lawyer didn't actually have lunch with Paul Allen.
Yes, I suppose that's true, yeah.
But everything else, like the fact that he's not arrested and that there was no story in the New York Times about the fact that was a murder apartment that he went to visit, Yeah. But I've sort of set myself on a tangent. I'll just pretend I've got a really clever linking device to go back to what I said, though, which is just, I was thinking about the fact it's actually a really good adaptation of the book. In line with most authors, who can be quite tiresome, Ellis himself has said he thinks American Psycho was a book that didn't think needed to be turned to movie. Took the bloody money for it, though, didn't you? You can't take the money to option your book to make a film and say, well, I don't think it needed to be made. You take that money, you don't have a say in it anymore.
Yes.
What this film, I mean, it's only tangentially connected, really, but just because in particular, because you mentioned Less Than Zero, Scott, I'm kind of tempted to go back and watch Rules of Attraction again now.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was particularly successful, and didn't that have Dawson's Creek in it?
It did to my memory, but other than it being a film that exists, I can remember almost nothing of it. So
I think Patrick Bateman is
I believe it's his
He made a cameo.
brother.
This is younger brother, isn't it?
Yeah, he has. And
Dawson's Creek.
I recall the book has a Patrick Bateman cameo. I don't think the film did, if I recall, because I'm pretty sure I reviewed it, but I can't remember anything about it. So yes,
I think I remember that Dawson's Creek was a particularly odious and unlikable person. So, that fits in with all Betty Snell stuff.
yes, that'll work.
I
Yeah,
don't think he was quite so charismatic as Christian Bale in this, but few people ever have been. Yes. Feed me a stray cat.